Welcome to Creation Station Monthly. I'm Bob from Creation Station. This is our monthly show. This is where we do a deep dive. We spend 1 hour talking about a topic with two interesting creative people on a particular topic, something that you could be a creator yourself in. Now, we use that creation thing a lot around here. This month is podcasting. I want to introduce our two guests today. I've got Rob Dunwood from the Tech John. How are you doing today, sir?
Not bad, Bob. How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
And I've got Michael Graves. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Bob. Nice to meet you guys.
So I want to get started with this because, as always, every month, our two guests have no idea who each other are. So, Rob, if you could introduce yourself a little bit, tell us what you do. And Michael, you just feed right off of them and go back and forth.
Well, I am Rob Dunwood, and I am, from a career standpoint, I am kind of a retired technology, industry, manager. I've been in the tech field since probably the early '90s, and I decided right around the start of the pandemic, actually a little before the pandemic, you know what? Let's take a break and figure out if this podcasting thing is what you really want to do. So the timing for me for really going strong in the podcasting towards the end of 2019 was perfect because not that I wanted to have a pandemic, but there was just so much opportunity because so many people are now a captive audience and are looking for different types of content to consume. So podcasting for me for the last, couple of years has been a real boon for me personally.
Well, that's fantastic. And coming from a tech background, it must have been sort of second nature to you. I mean, how did you get started? How was your tooling up process? How did you pick topics? That's a good thing.
I guess I have been a podcaster for some time now. I started doing my first podcast all the way back in 2009. And basically, it was a podcast that is still running to this day, called the SMR Podcast. And it was myself and two other tech executives that we basically would have company meetings. We all worked at the same place. And when we would get together, we would just start hashing out tech topics. I was pro BlackBerry. Another guy was pro Windows Phone. So we would just talk about the tech that we were really into, almost like you would be talking about your favorite sports team. And what we started to notice is as we're having these conversations at these big company group outings that we would have, we would start to get a small audience. There'd be 10, 15 people just sitting, listening to the three of us talk about what phone we liked. And, a friend of ours said, you guys really should do a podcast. I probably had heard of the term at that point, but never really thought about it. But, it's very minimal equipment that is required. So, back in the winter of 2009, myself and two other buddies literally just got in front of a microphone and started talking about technology, having the conversations that we were having whenever we get together in person. We started doing that weekly, in the form of a podcast. And I think now we're up to episode 531 or 32 or something like that. So we've been doing this for like I said, since 2009.
That's really cool.
131 just dropped.
Do we need to have an obligatory moment of silence for the final shutdown of the last BlackBerry services last week? There we go.
So
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Long time ago, I used to run a little BlackBerry website that was one of the biggest BlackBerry enthusiast websites, on the internet. It was quite popular. So I had to pull out. I still have BlackBerries that are brand new in the box. I had to pull some out just to show them some love when they shut down a little while
Yeah, I'm a
ago.
Canadian. I'm a Canadian transplant in Texas. So but I'm also slightly impulsive or compulsive in nature. So I avoided Blackberries for a little while because I knew that I would be sitting there just, doing the whole crackberry thing. And I waited, and I started with an 8100, a Pearl, and I ended up having 3 Blackberries before transitioning to Android.
I stayed with the
Oh, okay.
Palm. I never went to BlackBerry.
So what are you now, Bob? Are you Android? Are you
Oh, I'm
iOS?
Android. I'm Android.
Okay. It's a good thing.
I like the idea of being able to be flexible and do my things without without as much of a silo. So
Same here. And I would not call myself the fanboy of Android that I was of the BlackBerry, hence I had a website for it. But yeah, I'm Android as well, just because I like being able to do on the phone what I want to do on the phone.
Yeah, I have a
Great technology.
long history in open source. Not that I'm a software guy, I'm not, but I'm like right up against a whole lot of different open source projects and know a lot of people involved in that space, and that just kind of kept me going down the Google route for the moment. That's
So
a lot of
let me
episodes.
follow up on that one with you, Michael, real quick. What gear did you, in specific to podcasting, I guess, what was your first gear? Because Rob said he was just using a phone. You've been doing podcasting way back when, before it
Well,
was.
yeah, what from 2000? When was it? 2006 we started or something like that. I mean, we
Oh
went
yeah,
for
you're an
13
OG.
years. We went for 13 years. I should establish some context first, though. My background professionally, I come out of the media industry, broadcasting, music production, this sort of thing, and I spent a long time in television broadcasting, doing a lot of graphics work, but really on the technology side. I describe my career path as always walking the line between the creative folks and the technical folks, providing interface. So, you know, sometimes you got to think like a creative to be able to communicate the how-tos to the creative people. And you got to think like a programmer sometimes, because those guys just, no personality modules. But anyway, so that was kind of always walking that line. Somewhere along the line, I came to work for an English company who was getting started in the US, and they were just a little company. And we had like everybody in home offices. And this was going back to, I'm not kidding, 99, 2000. Um, and we needed a solution so that we could tie all of our people together, because we were spending way too much money on transatlantic phone service and stuff like that. Long this overseas calls via cell phones back then were expensive and all that kind of thing. And so I started dipping my toe into what was then the world of open source telephony. This is using software to place telephone calls over the internet. And this was novel and interesting, and ended up, I saved so much money for my employer that they put me in charge of telephony for the company in the US. And we set about having a strategy to tie all these things together. And wouldn't you know it, that all that stuff, that's all just audio production, right? It's all like transfer all that over into podcasting, no problem. In fact, what happens is I met a guy, his name is Randy Resnick. He's a retired American fellow who lives in Bordeaux, France. And he had just started a podcast called the VoIP Users Conference. And it was all for people who were tinkering in this space, which is kind of like the 21st century version of shortwave radio, really, sending sound over the internet. And that includes, because he's also was a professional musician, he was like wanting to
Some
jam
of us
with
were doing
people.
shortwave radio. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, we're dating ourselves. Anyhow, so the way that all this came together, he had started this little podcast, and it was all being done using a free service by telephone. So it was literally a conference call that got recorded. And they had some tools that you could use. And that outfit is still going. It's called TalkShoe, and they're still offering that service, but it's audio only, as far as I know. But you could dial in by telephone, or you could eventually connect by computer. That computers came later, actually. And we just did this weekly thing, and we were getting software guys, hardware guys, users. We were helping each other solve problems and all this kind of stuff. We didn't always have a topic, but eventually, a couple of hundred episodes in, we started to get guests who were maybe commercial players. We had at one point we had people from Polycom, from Cisco, from a company called Lifesize, all these hardware and software vendors. We had the CTO of the FCC on as a guest one time. We had quite a good group of people. And we went for about 1,300 episodes. No, 900 episodes, 13 years. And it started from audio only, and then we sort of transitioned over different host platforms. We were running on Google Hangouts for quite a while when Hangouts were around, Hangouts on Air. And then we would glue that, since we were telecom geeks, we would glue that to a conference bridge. And at one point, for quite a long time, it was a dial-in show. We had dial-in access from about 30 countries, provided by a sponsor for free. So this all kind of came together, but my involvement, because it was fundamentally somebody else's project, and he was this creative energy, and I was just trying to shape it a little and wrap it in something that would be a little more polished, because sometimes we needed somebody to guide a line of thought, or
Yeah.
have an open and a close, or
How,
edit
how
out
does
the
that work for
nasty
you,
bits.
Rob? Because you've got people, Michael. You would, like you said, you had a large group of people, so you definitely need a wrangler. When you're dealing with just the 2 or 3 of you guys on yours, how does that work out for you there?
So it really depends on the show. So if we talk about that show I mentioned called the SMR podcast, it really is three good friends, and it is a conversation, as I said, like we're talking about sports, and we're just letting people hear our conversation. And it isn't terribly directed. We're kind of just like you don't really direct conversation about, your sports talk. It's kind of about what happened last week in sports since you last had a conversation. Well, we're going to talk about that. So it is, for the most part, topical news. But it really is, what do we have going on? A third of the time we might be talking about grilling if it's summertime. Third of the
Uh,
time we might be talking about woodworking. It literally is three buddies who just get together and have conversations. And over the years, we found that people like listening to those conversations. Now, if we move over to my new show, The Tech John, which we just started back in towards the end of the summer last year, we just did episode 19 that released today. That is much more of a scripted is a strong word, but we definitely have a rundown of show notes. So we were going to hit this topic, where we actually get into a document and we script out what tech stories we're going to talk about. And I host that show. I've got two other industry veterans who have been doing IT for years, and also are personalities on the internet, or even on television. And so that show's a little different, whereas it is, like I said, scripted is not so much, because it is free flowing, but there is a rundown of, we're going to try to hit this topic, then we're going to move to this topic, and we time things so that we can be roughly within a and we like to call it hour-ish. We try to be
yeah.
at least 55 minutes. We try not to be more than an hour and 5 minutes. Sometimes you're going to get an hour and 12, sometimes you'll get 48. It just kind of depends on what was happening and how the conversation is flowing.
That is a
So
practical factor, isn't it? Because you can be too long and you can be too short for your audience, right?
yeah, oh, absolutely. Because when you think about podcasts, now things in the before times when people actually used to drive to work in mass, your podcast segments or your podcast, you tried to fit it into your listeners' drive time, because they were either listening on the way to work or they were listening on the way home from work. So you would sheet shows that, well, we try to get a show done in 20 minutes, or we try to get a show done in 40 minutes, or we try to get a show done in under an hour, just so you can make sure that folks are I'm going to listen to the show 3 times during the week. It's an hour long. That gives me 20 minutes, out of 10 trips back and forth that I'm making, that you can get that show in. Whereas, like I said, my first show that I started, it could go for an hour. It could go for an hour and 40 minutes. It could go for, it's generally never under an hour, but it's usually always somewhere in that 75 to 90-minute range. And it's a different type of listener. What we found is that folks who are listening to that show are doing it when they're working out, when they're doing lawn care, when they're going to be someplace for an extended period of time. So you do try to craft, or at least I should say, I try to craft my shows around how our listeners are going to actually consume the content, because that determines how long you can go compared to, how short, or, you may need to, get us on or a show, just because you might have someone who's, I don't have time to listen to this. So when they see that it's an hour and 40 minutes long, they don't even start the show. It's just too long for them to actually consume it. Whereas if you're looking at another show that may only be 15 minutes, my drive is 45 minutes. I need something longer than that. So we try to actually find that happy medium of, of drive time in the before times. And today it is just making sure that you have, half-hour segments, and you can break those up generally into 15-minute segments. Like I said, we try to be right around an hour, every time.
Do
How are
you
people finding you, do you think? And I want to get back, Rob, you tell us first, and then Michael, I want to get to you, because I think it's really interesting on what you were saying earlier. Rob, how are people finding your stuff Because you mentioned they were just hanging out, you were hanging out and they watched you talking and it kind of migrated that way. Nowadays, is
So
how much of it is advertising versus personal?
So a big part of it, if I go back to 2009 when I first got started in this, there was really no thought given to how do people find you. It was just we're going to put it on the internet, and if people find it, that is awesome. People are listening to us. We move fast forward to today. We're actually trying to make sure that we're getting listeners. So we do everything from social media to email campaigns. One of the things that I have discovered or uncovered over my years of podcasting is that you truly are building a community. Even though myself and my co-hosts are the ones in front of the mic, in front of the camera, and we're always talking out, there's a community that you can build on the backside of a podcast. So people want to interact with you, whether it be on Twitter or if you could set up a Facebook group, or I'm really digging Discord these days. You can actually set up communities for people to have conversation with you. And what you will find is that if you nurture those communities, if you build those communities up, if you give them ownership, in your show, allowing them to make suggestions, allowing them to suggest maybe topics for shows or things that they like about the show, things that they don't like, and you actually can modify that to your audience, you will find that you get a very, very committed group of people who will literally follow you from show to show. So, today, like I said, I just, 20, not even 20 episodes in on a show that we started back in the summer. The biggest boon for it has been doing things like showing up on other shows, has been social media, pushing out the social media to just let the world know, here is a show, here's what it's about, here's the things that we talk about, maybe you would be interested in it. And we are finding that we're getting quite the audience that is just being built organically right off of social media, whether it be Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, or I think we're going to start doing TikTok here in the not too distant future. So it's it really is a social media play for us.
I'll that's a good challenge for later on. We'll talk about maybe at the end of how do you do a podcast within X amount of seconds on a TikTok. That'd be an interesting one. But Michael, you said you did one for a lot of years, and I know it's over now. But did it matter to you guys as part of the business side of things that you were attracting everybody else in the company, or did it start to attract people outside of the company to start listening to you guys?
We were tapping in the existing community largely because that we were tapping on this sort of like there are ham radio. It's going to sound geeky, but like there are ham radio geeks, right? There were sort of voice over IP telephony geeks out there, and we were really sort of leveraging that. And believe it or not, love Discord now, as you know, Bob.
Yep.
But these days, we were early in Twitter. We were early in things like Mastodon. We were trying a lot of platforms to see where the community could be garnered. We started out using IRC of all things, and stayed with that for quite a long time because it was open, it was unfettered. You could access from whatever platform, and it wasn't tied to any commercial service. But when that platform kind of devolved and it wasn't so sophisticated, and we ended up doing a lot on Google Plus when it was around, ultimately just a social media play, as you were saying. I do have a question for you, sir, though, and that is pre-production, post-production is one thing. Do you do a lot of both, a lot of that sort of thing? And also, what do you find the significance of using video versus, do you do anything that's just audio, or is it all video plus audio these days?
That's for you,
The
Rob.
question for me?
Yeah,
That's for you, Rob. Yeah, I don't do any
yeah.
production.
Okay,
We have a
so
very low end set here. You guys are the professionals.
So I have come to understand that there are varying degrees of pre-production, post-production work that go into doing a show. I am on the end of you record it and you post it, end of the spectrum. I'm not saying that that's the right way. It is just a way that is working for me and my crews that I do shows with. And that tends to work well because once again, we're technology based shows and we're talking about relatively recent news. So, and they're all panel discussions. It's, each show is at least 3 people on the show, sometimes more. So when you have that many people, it gives you the opportunity to kind of sit back and listen to what other folks are saying and actually formulate what you want to say without having to just keep the conversation going. If you're doing a monologue type show, or if you're doing a show on a very, very specific story and you're only talking about that one thing for the entirety of the show. So for me, I do very minimal, editing. The editing is just to make sure that if there is, sound issues, we try to get those out. Every now and again, you might have to cut, if you're just going way too long, you might cut an entire conversation out and then post it at another time. But I'm not huge on doing the sound editing that you would hear some of these NPR style shows have, to where they have a half-hour show, but they spent 30 hours editing, if not more, editing that show. That's not me, but I understand that is a big part of it. From a video standpoint, I will also say this: the audiences for podcasts, when I say podcast, I'm purely talking about the audio format, and the audience for video, to me, are very different. There's definitely overlap, but there's very different types of listeners, because that podcast listener, they can do other things. They can cut the grass, they can, clean the house, they can drive back and forth to point A to point B while they're listening. When you are watching a video podcast, you literally are sitting in front of a screen or holding a screen in your hand, and you're watching for the entirety of the show. So we have found on the Tech John, probably around episode 8 or 9, we decided to actually start doing live streaming. One of the reasons our community was saying, hey, we'd love to join in while you're recording. So we actually set that up, and every week when we record, we have folks who are actually joining our live stream from the beginning of the live stream to the end of the live stream. So what you see in that live stream is probably 98.7% of what you're going to hear in the podcast, because there's going to be things that'll be clipped off the front. There'll be things that'll be clipped off the end for timing's sake. And then we're just having, jovial conversation with folks in the actual live stream that doesn't play well to people who are listening. So we cut those pieces out. But, it just really depends, to answer your original question. It just kind of depends on the audience, and it depends on the type of show. My style of show, these tech roundtable type shows, we tend not to really do a lot of editing.
Yeah, that's interesting. We started out audio only and stayed that way for a long, long time. And it was because 6'8", guys talking about IT stuff is not a visual. At the time, we didn't think it was all that interesting, and eventually there was an audience for it. But we found that it was really important to post the audio as an independent thing, because there were all those people who were listening while they're out walking their dog or driving to work or what have you. And but the live streaming thing, that has just kicked in. I mean, in the last 4 or 5 years, just so much. And now we have such great tools. I happen to be a big fan of vMix, but I make a point of playing with everything I can get on to experiment with live streaming video, because it harkens back to my original broadcast background. And I think everything we can do to put a little more polish on the visual part of the presentation overcomes the fact that I'm not a whole lot to look at. So,
Mike, I'm finding that when it comes to live streaming, or even getting into the vlogging, but since I am a podcaster, almost everything that I do from a live streaming standpoint is in support of an audio piece of content. I find, however, that I can run a podcast by myself. I can host it and produce it as I'm running the podcast. That's ridiculously difficult to do when it is a live show. There's just so many moving parts. So things that I would love to be able to do when, on a live stream, if we're talking about a particular story, to actually have a lower third or even a full screen takeover of an article, from The Verge or from TechCrunch or from whatever, place we're pulling that piece of news from, to actually have that up on the screen for a few seconds and then fade back to the actual host as we're talking about it. But I think in order to do that, at least, from my perspective, you almost need to have a party who is not part of the conversation, who's actually running that. I think in the industry, we kind of call those producers, but we need to have somebody who's physically clicking buttons and doing things to make that visual aspect of your show look really, really good to the people who are who are listening. So I'm personally trying to learn more about that, because as I've said, I've been on the audio side of this for years. When you think about, my live stream, it is an audio podcast that we actually have microphones and cameras in front of us while we're doing the recording, but it is built for the audio piece. I really want to get into building for video, because I think that you'll start to find some shorter format type stuff. You can't necessarily do hour and 15-minute videos twice a week, 3 times a week. You might need to chop those down to 20 minutes, but that 20 minutes needs to be very, very highly produced, and that's something that I'm personally trying to learn a little bit more about.
One of the things I've done, it came out of the podcast and sort of in the waning years of the VoIP Users Conference, was there was a community we were adjunct to they have a technical conference in Chicago every summer. It's gone remote since COVID, but it's basically the event's called ClueCon, and people can go to cluecon.org, I believe, or com. And basically, they said, hey, we like what you're doing with this podcast and live streaming stuff, and they asked for our assistance to help them live stream their 3-day engineering conference, which we turned around and did 3 times. I mean, they'd been recording it and then posting it and spending an eternity editing video, like having volunteers edit boatloads of video. It was really painful. So I said, no, we need to change this. We need to do this like a live stream. Yeah, we're going to have a couple, 3 cameras and all that. And we can do it. And it worked out really well. And what it did was, as COVID hit, it all of a sudden meant that people who couldn't travel could still participate, and they could virtualize their conference, having had some experience of live streaming previously. Of course, they're all telecom software engineers, so they all think they could tell us how to do it, but video is a little different.
So what do you guys think about what society out there in general thinks about people who do podcasting? I mean, is it because like you guys said, in the early days, it was just, it was a very geeky thing. And now it's like, oh, wait, no, you need to have every single piece of media has to come along with some sort of associated podcast.
So I think, especially since COVID, so since 2020, the perception has changed dramatically, to where not just more people are interested in doing podcasting from their standpoint, more people are listening to podcasts, but you have folks who are, this is how my business is operating now. I can't go to the conference any longer. I can't be on stage. I can't have the local meetup, but I still need to get my message out there. So you're seeing a lot of folks who maybe were public speakers, who were trainers, who were coaches, business consultants. These type of folks are creating podcasts left and right. I think the podcast industry in the last few years has just been on an absolute boom, just because of the situation that we are in, where there is social distancing. I have a T-shirt that I wear that says, I was social distancing before it was cool. I love sitting down in my basement with a couple of lights, a microphone, and a camera, and being able to talk literally to anyone on earth who has internet connectivity. Yeah. That's not a new thing. As Mike, you've been doing this since 2006. I've been doing this since 2009. But since the pandemic
radio started, back in the early 80s, yeah.
It has really changed it. And I'm seeing that you're starting to see where, as I started off as a hobby podcaster, it was just 3 buddies that were talking about stuff. We weren't necessarily trying to monetize or make money from doing that thing, to where now you can actually run full-fledged businesses by getting your content in front of people. I've been saying this, I can't remember where I first heard this term, but teaching sales, when you have a piece of knowledge that someone else wants, and if you can get that to them in an effective way, there is a way to monetize it. There's definitely a way that you can make money off of that. And I think a lot of times people think, oh, I want to be Joe Rogan, or I want to be someone like one of these big giant. Well, I think he's probably the biggest podcaster. You're going to be that. You don't have to go that route. If you have a business, you can literally, if you have a business making T-shirts, there's a podcast that I have a friend who does. She basically has a T-shirt business. And she creates these really, really cool sayings that she puts on T-shirts. And once the pandemic started, she literally just started a podcast about how she runs her t-shirt business. And she's
Okay,
getting,
I
you
gotta.
know,
What's the name of
episodes.
that one? Let me look it up as you're finishing.
She's no longer doing, I cannot
Oh, okay,
remember the
okay, never
name of
mind.
her show. So she's no longer doing it, but for about, I think she did probably about 30 episodes,
Huh.
where she was doing like 2 episodes a week. And at the end of it, she was getting about 1,000 downloads per episode talking about just the t-shirt business. And she has pivoted from the podcast to where now she's more doing live streaming and those kind of things. And I apologize, I cannot think, she's going to kill me when she hears
No,
this
don't worry
because I
about it.
can't think of the name of her.
When we share this out on Facebook, you can tag her in the Facebook feed.
We'll
It'll be
absolutely
there
do
for her.
that. But it's just really interesting that she was able to take her, her side hustle business
Yeah.
of creating t-shirts and create a podcast about that and find an avid audience. And I think a lot of times we're thinking, oh, I have to have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media in order for these things to blow up. And that's not the case. When she ended it, she was getting about 1,000 downloads, an episode, but she only did roughly 30 episodes. So she probably had somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 22, 23,000 total episodes, but it completely changed her business because she was talking to her exact avatar, the person who was
Yeah.
most interested in her business. And now what she does is not just run her t-shirt business, but she coaches other people how to do small businesses like that. So she almost saw a career shift, so to speak, come from doing a podcast. And I think you're seeing so many people who are having similar type testimonies when they when they move into this space. It is just completely wide open. If you have something that you like to talk about, something that you know well, and there is someone on the other end of your microphone that wants to know how to do that, even if it's not from ad sales, even if it's not from revenue that you're generating directly by the publishing of the podcast, you may be able to have some type of income gain on the backside based off of you have just increased your notoriety. And people might ask you, okay, can you show me how to do this? You could set up a consulting type situation, or you could create a training program. You could create a course based off of people getting to know you. Know, like, and trust has always been a thing in sales. If people know you, they like you, and they trust you, they will consume from you. They'll buy from you. And I think a podcast absolutely helps people do that.
You
How
know, you're
about that,
talking about
Michael?
avenue of engagement. It's a new avenue of engagement, and what you just nailed there is something that's really interesting because the internet has led to a sort of a virtualization of communities, but it started out slowly and it's definitely accelerated in the last couple of years. And so what happens is now when your potential market or your potential audience is global, it doesn't matter that you're in this incredible little niche of, I collect green Honda Matchbox cars or something like that, right? Because you can now engage with everybody else on the planet who likes Matchbox cars. And all of a sudden you're not restricted by whatever the narrow focus might be, or even if it's slightly broader, you can find an audience or build an audience for that. And it does present opportunities for people. It's fantastic.
I'm gonna bet there's a Matchbox Car podcast out there somewhere.
I just made that up. I have a question about curation though, because I being slightly older, I'm struggling for sensible ways to find recommended podcasts and such like. And that's been my struggle.
I would say that podcast discovery is still a really, really, really big issue. It is, you have a lot of podcasters who have extremely popular shows, and their website literally is the host that they're on. They're not putting anything in the social, media. Really, they're not putting much into search engine optimization. They literally have just created a show, and it is somehow caught on. So when I think it's so over the map. It's kind of a different story for everyone. But I think that if you're going to get a podcast and you want to get it out there, you want to make it discoverable, you almost have to have a home base. People generally don't go to a podcast app to look for content. They go to a podcast app to listen to content that they already know about. So I think that from a discovery standpoint, you almost have to have a website. There's going to be other experts that are going to tell you, something different. But from where I'm sitting, you need a website so that when I go to Google or I go to Yahoo, I can type in, I want to look at how to make a cutting board, and I'm going to find content on how to make a cutting board. And maybe there's a podcast that talks about making cutting boards that's right there at the top of the list. So I think that you need to have some home base where you can do some level of search engine optimization to where you can actually, either rank for the keywords that you want your audience to find you. When they're searching, they can find you by it, or you need to buy those keywords and actually set up advertising. There are a lot of folks who don't do that. And that's okay. It just depends on, the speed at which you are looking to grow. But I think like I said, discovery is a real issue. It is amazing to me that Google really just in the last 18 months, 2 years has actually started to look at podcasting seriously and say, oh, okay, we're going to start ranking podcasts, and we're going to actually build a proper podcast app that people can listen to, shows on our platform without making them go download some third-party podcatching application. But Mike, you bring up something that is, a real issue. It is very, very difficult to just on your own find a podcast. I still think that most people find a show because somebody recommended a show, or most people find a show because they already listened to one podcast. A guest comes on, you find that guest interesting, so you go look up their credentials and then you find their show. But
Sure.
I do believe that things are getting better with actual building websites around the podcast to where you can do those search engine optimization things that are how every other website works in the world.
I totally agree. And not only that, but I'll tell you at the opposite end of it, it's true. Our VoIP Users Conference podcast had a website, and we actually got the domain vuc.me. And we still have that, in fact. But the project came to an end. It had run its course after 13 years, but it came to an end when the host, who was a sponsor, they provided the hosting as in-kind sponsorship, had a problem, and they lost the site. And that kind of was a message to us that it's done. It was done, and they lost the site, and in so doing, we lost the audio archive of everything that wasn't also on YouTube because of the live streaming of the Google Plus video and whatnot. So of the 900 something episodes, I think the first 300 of them were ultimately lost, which is a ton of audio. I mean, tons and tons and tons of audio. But vuc.me, we turned around and made the domain. Actually, one of our listeners, a longtime listener, acquired the domain and turned it into a clearinghouse of links to the various different software projects that formed the community that we were addressing at the time. And it's still out there.
Speaking about the community idea and doing podcast discovery in a different way, what do you guys think about the new, Clubhouse rose and fell, and now we've got, Discord stages, and we've got Twitter Spaces. Do those count in your eyes as a podcast if you can't go back to it?
It counts as content that people are consuming. So I am not that purist that is going to say, well, a podcast is pre-recorded audio that you listen to on your iPod only. If you want to be a purist, that's the only podcast can be the only time you can listen to a podcast is if you're doing it on an iPod, hence the name podcast. I'm not that kind of purist. I am more of a content person. I think that people are starving for content. If you can create that content and get it in front of them, you have an opportunity to do some really, really cool things. So, whether it be a podcast, whether it be a live stream, whether it be a video podcast, whether it be a vlog, as long as you have an audience, as long as there's somebody on the other side of that mic, on the other side of that camera that is willing to listen to you, you can get that content to them however you like. I, unfortunately, because I'm an Android user, I wasn't able to get in on the ground floor of Clubhouse. I thought it was a really, really good idea. I still think it is because of all the clones that are absolutely coming after them, and in some cases have surpassed it. I'm more of a Twitter Spaces person because that has just taken off, from where I'm sitting. Are those podcasts? Well, by definition, no, but it doesn't matter. They're content. People are using them. I have seen people who have came out of obscurity to now they are known in their space because of Clubhouse, because of Twitter Spaces. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether that's technically a podcast. It's content that people are able to consume, and you're able to get your message out and able to do things on the backside of that.
I look at those things and I say, if they're not a podcast today, they will be tomorrow when the recording is posted, because they're pre-production platforms for a podcast. The only thing is, you're going to have what you're going to have, right? It's going to be as rough and rugged and raw as the people who engage with you in that clubhouse room on that day. And maybe you have to edit some bits out, or maybe you don't. So, but it's fundamentally different, right? Because that's a kind of a social engagement thing. Although I suppose you could use it for your pre-production if you wanted to. So I had my first engagement with Twitter Spaces yesterday with a gentleman who works for the IETF. And it just happens that I saw his tweet go by as he was playing with it. And he used to produce a podcast called, it was a VoIP security podcast. He worked for a company called Mitel, and I helped him with his post-production way back in the day. And now he's at the IETF. And the trick is try everything, because you don't know what's going to catch, right? And so you just have to keep your eyes open and take a little time to play every day.
Yeah, when Clubhouse came out, I was truly impressed. It's like, wow, did they go back to 1984 and the party line? That's what initially it reminded me of people calling in. Now I'm a little young to have been doing that, but I have older siblings who were. Where it's like, so you mean to tell me you're going to actually spend money to call into a line and talk to a bunch of people you don't know? But Clubhouse, that is how I described it when I first really understood what it was. And now you see there's Clubhouse, there's Twitter Spaces, there's Discord, there's Facebook, there's all these clones that are doing it. I don't know. I kind of think the Clubhouse might go the way of Vine, that they just can't grow fast enough to compete. They're dealing with hundreds of thousands or millions of users, and then you've got the likes of Facebook, and they're talking about billions of users, and that is just a different number. So I don't know if
will kill you.
Yeah. I don't know if Clubhouse will be the thing, but I think the thing that they came up with, that let's go live and have people listen to you from an audio standpoint, that is here to stay. It's not going anywhere.
And speaking along those lines of success, and Michael, I want to get your feedback on this, because we always try. Everybody always asks, what was your greatest success in life, and what did you do? I want to hear what you guys, and I think, Michael, we already might have heard part of it, is what's the biggest failure that you've had in podcasting type thing? Is it really that losing that archive, or did something else go drastically wrong?
No, I mean, we had some shows go really wrong, but it's because we were doing what was fundamentally a semi-professionally produced, coordinated, often interview shows with sometimes commercial guests that also happen to have a lot of dial-in. And so to your point earlier, we had to have somebody being a technical director, somebody, keeping open lines muted and whatnot. And so we had some shows that went just completely, down the drain as we were learning. But I think the loss of that server was sort of the end of the project, but we didn't know, we didn't have a defined scope as to how far we were going to go. And we made a pivot on a topic at about year 12. And in the pivot, I think this is the biggest mistake we made in pivoting to expand away from our core technical focus. We lost a bunch of audience. And I think that was demoralizing. And so knowing if you've built an audience, if you're years in and you've built an audience, don't think that they'll just follow you anywhere you decide you want to go because this topic now bores you. You built an audience for that topic. And I think we didn't realize that at the time. So, we should have actually wound down one project and started up another one. And in fact, we did. We started a podcast on wine, which went for about 12 episodes. And we interviewed some winemakers. As I said, my partner was in Bordeaux, and he happens to be something of an expert, and that was an interesting experience too. And lo and behold, in COVID times, Napa Valley wineries are having online wine tastings where you can log into their WebEx and see the winemaker, talk about all this stuff. So you can go wherever you want with this. I think our successes far outnumbered our failures, and if they hadn't, we wouldn't have gone on for so long.
Yeah. How about you, Rob? What's the mistake or the failure that you look back on and say, darn?
I will talk about
'Cause
mistakes.
that's
I
my
can't
thing.
say-
I've
yeah.
promised I'm not going to curse on this podcast, and I've made it 70 something episodes so far.
Mistakes have been, and this is, in my first show where I was just learning what I was doing. The biggest mistake is not being in tune to what your audience is asking for. So, you know, the SMR podcast, it is a tech show, but there are folks who like the woodworking that we talk about on the show. It took us years to create another show to talk about that. Another thing that we talk about a lot on the SMR podcast, even though it is a tech show, we talk about grilling and stuff like that. It took years for, two of the hosts of the show to get together and decide, what, we really should create a show specifically talking about smoking meat and barbecuing and those type of things. We have so many listeners who want that, to where we have just denied them for years. So it's kind of like, you do that, and then the new show that you launches almost to massive success. And it's like, well, yeah, we've been telling you for years, this is what we want. So the mistake is not necessarily listening to your audience and giving them what they want. I'm not saying that every show you do has to be that. I've actually had some people say, I really don't care what my audience thinks. I'm recording this as cathartic for me. There are shows that are like that. And if people want to listen, they'll listen. If they don't, they don't. I get that. But if you are not doing that type of show, if you are trying to do a show where there is community, you really want to listen to what your community is telling you, because they'll tell you what they want. I hear all the time in the coaching space or in the even in the software productization space, it's like, well, what do our customers need? If you talk to them and ask them, they will tell you what they need. They may not express it in the terms of a product, but if you listen, if you're in tune to the problems, the struggles that they're going through, because they're telling you what their problems and their struggles are, you then can kind of say, you know what? This kind of episode might be what that, what that segment of our community needs. Maybe if we were to do a series, that was what that part of our community might need. Maybe if we were to actually break that out and do a whole show dedicated to that, that's what our community could need. And because I am now, I guess you can call me a professional podcaster. This is what I now do for a living. So I am trying to, monetize what I do. I'm trying to be very careful that I'm not doing everything as a money play, because I really want to give content to my audiences that they want to hear. And if monetization can come on the backside of that, that's great. So, from the mistake is not being in tune with that. Or, I personally haven't done this, but I've seen shows to where, we should talk about this because everybody's going and buying this thing right now. So we need to talk about this one piece of tech because we can make a lot on affiliate sales. I think if you're doing that kind of stuff, you might be missing the mark. And I'm not telling anyone who has a show that you shouldn't be doing that. I have affiliate links all throughout my shows. But I really think that as long as you keep, the customers, if you put your customer first, if you put your listener first, you're going to probably do some really good things. You just, so from a mistake standpoint, not being in tune and listening to what your audience is telling you they want to hear.
And let me feed off of that one there for you too, Rob, because one of the questions we always ask is how do you take this? Because being a podcaster is a creative pursuit. Because as you say, if you're not interested in what you're talking about, if you're trying to do it for you're not going to get an audience, you're not going to do any of that. So where do you think that line becomes from doing it for fun, where you're just, okay, here's a 2 or 3, things that we throw out there, or trying to make a living at it? And doing that. Obviously you can, but it's got to be few and far between people who can actually support themselves on this.
So there is I think it's actually a white paper by Kevin Kelly called 1,000 True Fans. And it's one of my favorite things to read. I probably read that thing every 3 to 4 months, just go back and just kind of, re-level set. As I said earlier, you don't have to have a Joe Rogan type audience listening to your show to monetize it. If you have 1,000 true fans who are listening to you and hanging on your every word and consuming your content and asking you for more and telling you what you want, you've truly got a community of true fans. You only need 1,000 of them to make a legitimate upper middle class living. I am a testament to that. I can honestly tell you that is what I now do for a living. So, so when you go into this, as long as you are putting, and from my perspective, as long as you're putting your your audience first, or putting your customer first, if you're a consultant or a coach or something like that, as long as you're getting their needs out there and you're not making it seem like it is a money play, like you just do this thing so you can make money for me. As long as you're not doing that, as long as you are truly being helpful to that person. And when I say to that person, even though your audience may be thousands or tens of thousands, you should treat it like you're talking to an individual. You should treat it like you're having a conversation with whoever is right on the other side of that camera, who's right on the other side of that microphone. And when you do that, what I find is that your listeners, they will tell you, how can I support you? How can I help you out? You're giving me this content every week, every every other day, whatever your schedule is. You're doing this for me. How can I support you? We understand that you can't just live off of me listening. There's got to be, something else there. So, I have actually seen where I didn't have a Patreon on, on any site for a while. I literally had people who were calling in, or who were messaging and saying, hey, can you please set up a Patreon? Can you please set up but we would like to help support your show. We want to see it.
Let me buy a t-shirt. Let me get a tote bag. Yeah,
exactly. I literally had someone a week ago. They saw me. I'm wearing a Tech John sweatshirt right now. They saw it. Where's your store? I want to buy one. My sister would like to get one. Where can I get that? That is the type of response that you have. My wife got me this for Christmas. It wasn't something that I was doing. Oh, you know what? If I get these t-shirts, I can make money off of my listeners. It wasn't that. But the fact that it now exists, I have listeners who are saying, I like what you're doing, Rob. I like what you're doing, Stephanie. I like what you're doing, Terrence. Can I get those are the guests or the other host of my show, The Tech Gen. I like what you're doing. Can I get can I get a t-shirt? Can I get a mug? Can I get a sticker? There are things that you can do to monetize your following, as long as you're nurturing that following and treating it right and respecting it and not treating it like it is a money play. I absolutely believe, just there, like I said, not necessarily Joe Rogan type, living off of it.
But you don't have to go straight up
off of 1,000 true fans.
Tell me, Michael, how about it? What do you think about a career in that? You've made a career.
It's all good. Well, I've made a lot of podcasts. I wouldn't say I've made a career in podcasting, but it's been parallel to, in sync with other things that I've been doing. There's a word that hasn't come up yet that needs to come up, because I'm tempted to say some names, but I'm not going to, because it would be in maybe poor form. But as long as you're authentic, as long as you're being real and you're being authentic in your presentation and how you present, whether it's, sponsored product or any of that kind of stuff, then the audience will respect and be drawn. And we've seen that time and time again. And the podcasts that I can't listen to are ones where it's just plainly evident that it's a dollar play. It's all, they got to sell a bunch of these, whatever it is. And I'm not interested in that necessarily, but I do want to know, if you're somebody whose opinion I trust, because I've been listening to you a long time, I want to know what you think about this new gadget that came out. And I'm listening to all kinds of IoT podcasts these days because I want to know about every little gadget for the house that's come out. And but I also want to know that the person who's talking about it is speaking from more experience than I have, because otherwise it's not useful to me.
Yeah. And I think that's very much going back to the idea of the Discord and Twitter spaces and things like that. I mean, I know Michael from a Discord thing where we do a talk every Thursday and about a topic, and there's a topic picked, and it's just experts coming in and hanging out and talking and doing that kind of thing. So I think that matches up really well with that. And there's no way I would consider that a professional or money-making thing. It's just something we do because we all are interested and want to do it.
What we had happen with the VoIP Users Conference was we had some people who were service providers who were providing businesses with telecom services, office telephony, hosted PBX, this kind of thing. we had them come to us and say, you know, this is really cool. We use the software that you guys are talking to all these communities. We'll give you some money. And so we got, it wasn't through our own doing. They came to us and we got a handful of sponsors that paid us quarterly, just some money. And that's what kind of drove us to say, okay, on the video, we really need to have a structured open that acknowledges the sponsors and has like a slide that says what the topic is for the day. And it sort of drove the refinement of the production because we had to acknowledge the fact that people were giving us money to do this now.
So interesting point on that. One of the things that I love about the audio podcast, is that I can record when I record my podcast, unless I'm doing a host read ad, which is very rare. Usually my ads are injected into the show. You never know that there's an ad in it from the raw audio that I record. So one of the things you can do to respect your audience is like, hey, I don't want to listen to a bunch of ads. Well, you know what? Here is an ad-free stream. It costs $3 a month. It costs $5 a month. But if you don't want to have any ads, we've created a stream that is completely ad-free, but but you have to support it. And for years, I struggled with doing that until I actually did it. And it was like overwhelmingly, oh yeah, I'd love to support your show. I still listen for the ads too. I'm gonna pay for the ad-free stream, and I'm gonna still listen, with the ads, because sometimes I hear an ad that I like. I kid you not, I had someone in the last 2 weeks that wrote me that, in a direct message in Twitter. They actually pay for the ad-free stream and they still listen with ads because they like the ads that they're getting. Go
I
figure.
still I pay for the free stream on a couple of podcasts, but I listen to the ads only because I use my Amazon voice assistant, since we won't wake anybody up, and they don't do ad free. They will inject the ads no matter what for you. So I can't customize a stream in there yet. They're getting better, but as an organizational thing, going back to our original idea, yeah, whichever app or whatever you're going to be using it'd be interesting.
And no, Bob, one of the questions you asked, in the email that you sent about this episode that we're doing, and even in the green room before we went live, was just talking about, how can you turn this into a business? And I think, Mike, you said it. You have to be authentic. If your audience ever thinks that it's a money play, that's the last time that person's going to listen to you. So you really have to be authentic, and you have to be in it for the betterment of the person on the other side of the microphone. But once that's said, if you are providing them value, I am just because people just keep showing me this over and over and over again. If you're giving them value, they are more than happy to support you financially, whether that be buying your product, buying your course, visiting the sponsors that you are getting in your show, potentially, clicking on an affiliate link for something that you've talked about in a show. Those things actually happen. And as I said, it doesn't take, a Joe Rogan audience in order for you to monetize a podcast. 1,000 true fans. If you get 1,000 people who are listening to you intently, you can turn that into a full-time income.
And Michael, I do want to prove to you here that yes, I did find a podcast, Hot Wheels versus Matchbox. So yes, there is a podcast for everything.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. I may do another one yet. I just haven't figured out exactly what the scope would be.
We just flew through an entire hour here, guys, or hour-ish, as Rob's going to introduce me to this new term now here. So thank you guys both very much for being here as part of this. My library plug for everybody out there is, if you're down here in South Florida, come visit us. We have podcasting booths at a couple of our libraries. Collier City Library has a music studio, and South Regional has a full video podcasting space, and I'm about to open another one up for us, so it'll be fun.
The announcements are happening.
And there we go. Okay. That was a rather loud thing going in my background here to do that quick thing. So, Rob, we'll go with Michael. I put Rob's up first. Michael, where do you have? I've got your Graves, mgraves.org.
Yeah, my website is at mgraves.org. If anybody wants to see any of the former VoIP users podcasts, perhaps I'll pass you a link that maybe can go in any show notes. They're on YouTube. There's hundreds of them. The thing about technology podcasts from years back, though, is they're no longer current. So one does have to be careful. But they are interesting because they were all phone in. And that's still something that I wish to pursue further. So.
And Rob, I've got the Tech John up here for you, and I've got the SMR going on.
SMR podcast.
What else
So
have you got going on?
I will make it easy for everyone. I am at Rob Dunwood on everything. So my name is spelled ROBBDUNEWOOD. You can even go to robdunwood.com and you will get a Linktree style website that has links to everything that I have. So if you look for Rob Dunwood, you'll find me. Click on one of those links. You'll find one of the 2 or 3 podcasts that I'm actively working on.
That is an excellent thing. Thank you guys both very much for being here today. Let's put up our final slide. As always, if you have any questions for our hosts, the links will be in the show notes and we'll forward them along to you. We'll see you next month, everybody. Have a great day. Stay safe.